What does meta-analysis mean? Like, explain to people, like.
Yeah, it's one of the highest kind of, and like it breaks my heart because I know that person didn't ever intend for this person to not eat that, but it happens.
So no wonder you're so like passionate about it, because you're like.
But it's more common than you think. So 3% have diagnosable anorexia nervosa. It's actually one of the best things that they could eat because it's so calorically dense. It's going to help them fuel.
And somehow in America, it's like, you have to tell us that we're worth it, you know, as women.
1 out of every
Which is pretty bad, by the way. So don't
it's not great.
Take it very serious. Yeah, it's not great.
It's not fun. It's definitely not fun. But you have to weigh things, right? Like if you have a stage 4 cancer and it's your last hope of something and trying something that hasn't been well researched yet, that's a lot different than a healthy individual who has everything going for them, is super healthy.
Hi, my name is Aggie and this is Biohacking Bestie. The one-stop shop for a modern queen, where you can find biohacking courses, self-growth courses, and where you can find the most incredible community of women so you can hit all of your biohacking goals and beyond.
All right, guys, and welcome to another episode of Biohacking Bestie. Today, I'm hosting my dear friend Mary. Mary, welcome.
Hi,
Dr. Mary Pardee. And Mary is someone who's a straight shooter, and you're super honest. And something that I struggle with is my Eastern European upbringing, where we say things as they are. And in the US, it's considered controversial or rude. And this is how we communicate. So when I see you on your social media and you're just like, that's bull, that's the lectins, like you call a lot of things. And I really appreciate it, because I'm like, wow, that's rare.
I honestly feel like that's why I'm drawn to you too, just as a friend, where I really appreciate your communication style. Like you are just super direct. I like it though.
Yeah, I think you're the only person on the planet that appreciates my communication style. People are like, oh, she's so rude.
I know, my fiance says the same thing about me too. It's like his least favorite.
Yeah, Jacob's like, oh my God, Jacob's British. He's gonna go around and never say what he thinks, and it's even to the point that he's like, your facial expression even says what you think.
Yeah, just like deadpan. You're like, what are you talking about? But I think there's something really refreshing too in a society where we can't tell sometimes if people are being real with us or not. Yeah. And it's really nice to not have that like concern with real friends. So I like it.
So I bet you, as a doctor, and not only a doctor, but also like a practicing doctor, like let's just talk about the difference, because there are doctors out there on social media. There are obviously non-doctors on social media that have a lot to say. And then there are people that never treated a patient before. And so, like, how is that different? And why would people listen to someone like you who's actually still seeing patients?
Yeah, it's something that isn't talked about a lot, but I think it's important to realize that there are a bunch, like you said, of practitioners who have a medical license but aren't currently practicing. Mm-hmm. And you get out of practice. That's why it's called a practice. Like you don't do yoga once and you're a yogi, you have a yoga practice. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with medicine, because things are always evolving. New research is always coming out. And when you read a study, you get a finding or like a hypothesis kind of what they think may be going on. Unless you're applying that then to a bunch of patients, you don't have the clinical experience with it. Mm-hmm. And so it's really frustrating when you see people say, you know, do this and you'll get this, or like, you know, do this for hair and your hair will grow. It's like, have you done that with hundreds of people? And have you seen if it's actually worked or not? Yeah. Because just because you have a study that says maybe, if it was only one study, it doesn't mean it's replicatable amongst the general population. And so I think that's the big part of it, is you want somebody who's doing a lot of repetitions of what you're looking to heal.
Yeah, and you see, you love going on social media and kind of just like challenging what's being said, or all the trends on social media popularized by many people, influencers, doctors, and you're like, yo, I actually work with patients. This just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think my background is important to pull in here, because when I was in my teens and 20s,
I was in FBI.
Yeah, I was actually in the CIA.
So my background's pretty important.
No, but when I was in my teens and 20s, I was doing all of the things. Like I was doing all the things that I like trash on now, I was doing. And I'm open about that. I'm not trying to like say that I have figured it out this whole time. Like there's been times in my life where I was like, cholesterol doesn't matter, or, you know, this is bullshit, and like, don't go to conventional doctors, they know nothing. Like that was a phase of my life for sure. And And then I kind of got my butt whipped where I was like, this is a big thing for my ego, where I'm now seeing that this is not the case after having gone to medical school, and then practicing with patients and seeing like I was wrong with a lot of these things. And it's hard to admit that sometimes, especially when you're like type A and you've gotten A's your whole life and you're like, so I was wrong and I'm going to have to like backtrack. But I think it's kind of going through that process of saying like, okay, a lot of the things we're hearing on social media, on podcasts, is really clickbaity stuff. It's polarizing, it sells, and how much of it is clinically applicable, that's where the difference is.
Yeah, and even when I invited you to come on the show, you're like, I know we don't agree about a lot of things. Can I still talk about that? I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, I like changing my mind on things. I was a hardcore vegan, so obviously I'm not into, So you were vegan?
I was everything. I was vegan, I was keto, I was vegetarian, I was pescatarian. I mean, that's what I mean. I've done all of it. I've done.
All right, so I won't actually unpack all of these, but I'm curious to even like start from like what is like some of the things that you see from practice that it's quite popular or like used to believe in, but in practice doesn't really translate. And maybe I'll give you an example from my book, which is like, obviously I don't have a practice, but I have courses and, I see the back end of how things are working. And so what I'm realizing, the glucose goddess, the eat foods in the right order and start with fiber, then fats and meat, and then starches and sugar, and something that I've been popularizing as well. And just this last year, I realized that most women don't really understand fiber. And so they a lot of times also just have so much fiber, they end up not having enough protein. And so like when I look, I'm like, what did you eat? And I'm like, well, I couldn't eat that piece of meat because at that time I had all of these vegetables in a salad and whatever the thing, or they have no room for carbs at all and they don't eat carbs, right? Because you fill out on the fiber. And I'm like, well, like it's just in a way, it's a great framework, but I almost like now that I travel, I see I don't get to have 100 grams of protein, like because European portions are small and the fish is like this big, and it's like now that I have awareness of what 100 grams of protein is, I'm like, well, I start with the meat now. Like I start with the protein because I know that like I want to just get my enough, especially when I'm moving, traveling. I'm 36. I need my protein. I'm not 20 anymore. Like that's going to be my priority. I know I'll get my fiber, but it's almost the 30 grams of fiber isn't top of my priority as much as it is like my 100 grams of protein, which that's from personally, like just from my own practice and looking at women, that has changed.
Yeah, and that's individualized medicine, right? So right there, it's like, yeah, this is a good idea and it's not working for me, so I'm going to change things around because this is my goal, right? And I think that's how we should be working with individuals too, and that's definitely how I practice. There's a lot of things, like the one that comes to mind because it's so like front of mind is there's this study that's going around the internet that's like rosemary oil will help regrow your hair. And there is one study. There's a study about it. Am I allowed to talk about this?
Yeah, please. No, I feel like I'm in it, and I haven't heard the rosemary oil thing.
Okay, so the rosemary oil works better than minoxidil, which is a prescription topical for hair regrowth. And I found the study. There is a study, but they're looking at the wrong percentage of minoxidil. So it says it's as effective as this prescription medication, and it's true at the percentage they were looking at. But when we actually write a script, we write a script for a higher percentage than what they studied. So it's like saying, something is as effective of something that's not effective. It's like, who cares? Like, we don't use that prescription. Like, we just don't use that dose.
And so it's so important that you say that because there's always this conversation. Well, there is a study for this, right?
One study.
And then even if there is a study, I think it like the discernment and like I hire a professional like doctor to help me go through studies because the loopholes that are in the studies, who paid for the study, what's the actual dose, like I wouldn't be able to know that as a non-practicing doctor to call out the difference, right? And so you just read the study and you're like, oh dang, like rosemary oil, I guess like what's the point of using medication? But like having like the larger context that you can only get from like practicing it is just so important. But I feel like you can take so much information out of context and you can create any diet, I feel like,
You can Google anything you want, and you can find something that corroborates your evidence or your story, and that can be really dangerous. And so what you're looking at when you want to see something actually like robust evidence, there has to be multiple studies. You really want to see a meta-analysis that like
What does meta-analysis mean? Like, explain to people, like.
Yeah, it's one of the highest kind of like levels of a study that you can have when in terms of like the rigor of the evidence. Because what somebody did is somebody took their time and they pulled all of the studies. So say it's rosemary for hair growth, they looked at anybody who had looked at rosemary oil for hair growth, any of the studies, and then they said, okay, we're only going to look at studies who did this, this, and this. They had a placebo, so then they get rid of some of the studies that just aren't good studies anyways. And with the studies that they say, okay, they figured out what to do in the right way. What did they find? And so they're taking a sum of all of the studies that have been done, and then they're doing an analysis afterwards with the data from each of the studies to pool everything together to say, when we pool all the data from these however many studies, this is the end that we find. Was it significant or was it not significant? It's much, much more rigorous than a single study.
Okay, that's super important to know. I also, like, just to start off on a good note, I want to talk about something that was probably one of the most polarizing contents that you ever posted.
Oh boy.
That created so. I
I
wonder
feel
if
like I should be like an anonymous person right now, like an AI bot or something. So
no, because what you said, I think what pissed people off a lot is you saying that sugar is not inflammatory. And that's against everything that everyone says.
Yeah.
And you're like, show me a study that says sugar is inflammatory.
Yeah, and I just posted a follow-up that didn't get any traction, but I tried to do a longer one. Instagram is hard. 90 seconds is like nothing.
No.
Like, if I'm going to tell you like all the nuances and stuff, like I think I'm going to move to YouTube. But
that's the problem about like even just like clickbaity, because it's like sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to talk about like explain mitochondria in like 7 seconds, and they try in like a longer video and like no one watches it, and then he's like, this is how you lose weight. I'm like 2 million.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh God, like, but it's like it trains you to just be basic, you know?
Totally, yeah. And it's also a profession too, so I think people have to understand that. Yeah, sugar, I don't believe sugar is bad for us. And even in like the naturopathic functional medicine world, like most people would be like, what the heck? How are you saying that?
Throwing darts at the screen right now.
Yeah.
What's this moment?
So sugar, there's many types of sugar. So you have like glucose and you have fructose, right? And we kind of just call them all sugar.
Lactose, right, in milk, for example, in dairy.
Exactly. So we have these different molecules, but they're molecules. So like glucose is a molecule. And people sometimes get confused because if you have glucose in a Snickers bar and then you have glucose in a banana or a sweet potato, and the sweet potato would be in the form of starch, but after you eat that sweet potato, you release salivary amylase in the mouth, you release gastric like acid in the stomach, you release enzymes from your pancreas, and that starch becomes glucose. And the glucose from the Snickers bar and the glucose from the sweet potato are identical. Your body has no way of knowing where it came from. And so to say that sugar is bad for us, I think is just a really short-sighted view about what happens physiologically when you eat a food. Because after it gets into your stomach, the ingredients all look the same. And then they're absorbed over the wall and they go through circulation. And
you're talking about the macros, right? So like the breakdown, because there's also with the Snickers bar, obviously the problem is that it's just highly processed and whatnot.
It's the amount. It's the overconsumption. But and there's
and
another
the dyes and whatever the hell they put inside. Yeah.
There's another big piece of this. It's not part of the conversation enough, and it should be like a huge part of the conversation. It's hyperpalatability. If I had a bowl of table sugar right now and I put it in front of you and I said, eat as much as you want, you're not going to eat that much. Like table sugar doesn't taste that good.
No.
But you start to add salt and then butter, fat, and maybe some flour, and you start to mix all of this up. Then you have like cookie dough, right? And that tastes amazing, and you can overeat it so easily.
Yeah. I mean,
and that means that something is, same. I don't make it much because I know I will. But that's because the food is hyper palatable.
Yeah.
And when something's hyper palatable, it's very easily overconsumed. And the overconsumption of calories in general, including sugar, including fat, the overconsumption is an issue. And I'm not arguing that. That's obvious, right? That leads to obesity. Many things can result from that. But the sugar molecule itself is not the villain, I don't believe.
It's, and also, I guess, like, when you think back of, like, I look at my grandma and how healthy she was, and kind of like she had cake every single day. She baked cake. There was no way you could go to my grandma's house and she wouldn't have her own cake. And so she would have it at 4 p.m., but she had a small piece. And I think because we have built such an unhealthy relationship with food, because we eat processed food that makes us like, it just creates a very unhealthy relationship. So I'm paranoid because, like, I eat something, like, I overeat, then I feel uncomfortable, then I'm like almost avoid it. And the more I avoid it, the more it has control over me. And it becomes a very unhealthy dynamic with food. And then I know that people that have eating disorders can overeat on ridiculous things. They can overeat on, carrots, right? Like, it gets to a point that you can overeat on healthy things, not only the unhealthy ones, because it just becomes more of a, psychological issue and brain chemistry, right?
Yeah. I mean, eating anorexia nervosa is the second most deadly psychological illness in the world.
What's the first one? Depression?
It's opioid addiction.
Oh, no way.
Substance abuse disorder kills the most in terms of psychological conditions. But number 2 after opioids is anorexia nervosa. And it's every 52 seconds somebody dies directly of anorexia. It's extremely deadly. Yeah, it's extremely deadly. It's not discussed enough. But it's also why I'm really passionate about debunking these things, because I have patients with it, and I have patients that are inpatient, and I have patients that will go in and out of the hospital and, like, really concerned about their life and their safety.
Isn't it amazing that it's something that just seems so simple and they can't bring themselves to eat?
It's a real thing, and social media is feeding it. And so when we put out content, especially as women who are younger and are the role models perhaps for even younger women, we have to realize that there are people that are watching this that are really, really struggling. And so the nuances are so important, because if we're promoting really low calorie or restrictive diets or things like that, or saying, like, hey, don't eat this, it'll kill you. Like, there's, this product has chemicals, it's going to kill you. Some people, and I'm not saying it's all of our responsibility, right? But I think as public figures, it's part of our responsibility that some people listen to that and they say, okay, I can't eat that. And you don't know that they're 80 pounds, they're extremely underweight, and they could be seeing elevated liver enzymes and going into liver failure because of anorexia nervosa. And one person dies every 52 seconds as a direct result. And so we focus on the obesity epidemic, and it's a problem for sure, but anorexia is extremely, extremely dangerous for people's health. And these people will come to me and they say, well, so-and-so said this on social media, so I'm not eating that anymore. And, like, it breaks my heart, because I know that person didn't ever intend for this person to not eat that, but it happens. I see it happen. And so we have to be really careful with how we word things, because they can have a bigger impact than what we think.
Wow. I want to talk to you about functional medicine testing. And, I have done a $500 gut test multiple times. And I thought, oh my God, thank God I have a good idea of how healthy my gut is. And I'm doing so well. And here you are telling me that it's a waste of money.
Yeah. And I've done them too. And I've ordered them before.
Yeah.
And
we've supported the business, but
and medicine is a practice, and I've practiced and I've changed for sure.
Because the focus of your practice is digestive.
Yeah. So most of the patients that come to Modern Med have chronic GI issues. And that's how I got into medicine, is I had chronic GI issues.
What issues did you have?
Constipation and bloating.
I never seen you bloated.
From as long as I can remember. Constipation and like terrible bloating, reflux even.
That's so crazy, because, like, obviously we're friends. I don't think I've ever seen you bloated.
I still will get it once in a while for sure, but majority of my symptoms.
Once.
Oh yeah. It's TMI. This is why you don't do friends podcast. Yeah. Yeah, debilitating sometimes. But yes, I had a lot of GI issues, and to date, I can tell you, like, when I travel, I need to take stuff for constipation. I can be on top of it. Most people do. There's a ton of people that have constipation while traveling. And so that's how I got into it. And so I did all of the things. I mean, I saw acupuncturists. I had one guy put, like, electrodes on my stomach and, like, zap me. And I was like, I did it for weeks and weeks and weeks when I was a teenager. And looking back, I'm like, wow. I calculated at one point, and I think I've spent like over $100,000 on trying to fix my health. And then I went to medical school and spent, $250,000. And I'm like, so don't do all these things, like save your own money and donate it to charity or something. Yeah, so I've tried it all, and the gut testing sounds good. It's like, that makes sense. I'm treating my gut. I need to know what's in there in order to actually treat it. But there's a few big issues with that. And the first one, probably the biggest one, is that we to date don't know what the ideal gut microbiome is. We don't know. The researchers don't know. We're still looking into this. The field of the microbiome is in infancy right now. And we know so much.
And we know that it's different depending on where you live. So you can't really say, like, this is the ideal microbiome. Like, well, no, but you live in a tribe in Africa and your microbiome is very different. So it's not like it's better.
Yeah, and even in the same place between people, vastly different. So my microbiome versus your microbiome, very, very different, but we can both be healthy. So it's like a fingerprint almost. Like, nobody says my fingerprint's bad or yours is good. They're just different. And I think we'll definitely get to a place where we'll start to see, like, what do you need to have as components of the microbiome to make it a healthy one. But we don't know yet, so we're just guessing. So if that's all you knew right there, you would just say, well, then testing it doesn't matter. You don't test something unless you know what to do with the information afterwards. And if we don't know the ideal, then there's no way to know how to get there.
But there's some certain, like, you can tell you, like, the ratio of Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes, so we can tell, like, what do you think about stuff like that we already know that, like, the skinny people have the better ratio than
you just, like, teed me up perfectly. It's like, yeah perfect. We didn't even plan that. Okay, so then you go one level deeper. So what you're talking about, Firmicutes, that level right there is looking at the phyla. So if you guys remember, like, back in, like, maybe high school biology, you have kingdom, right? Where you have the animal kingdom, but then you also have the kingdom that contains bacteria and archaea. And within that kingdom, you have different phyla. Don't change the channel yet. It's going to get better. So you have different phyla.
Give her 10 more seconds.
Yeah. I'm going somewhere. You have different phyla. And one of the phyla is Proteobacter. So if we just look at, and then Firmicutes and Bacteroides are the other phyla. But if we just look at the Proteobacter, that is such a high level of classification that we go one more thing that's more specific, right? So we're going from, like, animal kingdom to Homo sapiens is what I'm doing, but in the bacterial.
Yeah, there's like a kingdom and maybe like a village, and then there's like a family or home unit.
We're just kind of zooming in to things as they get more specific. And so within Proteobacter, then you have a genus, all the genus that are in Proteobacter. And so one of them is Escherichiae. And you know this one because E. coli is like a really common one that we'll talk about with foodborne illness. But the genus itself is still a very broad term when it comes to bacteria. And that is usually the level that these stool tests are looking at. They're listing how much Streptococcus do you have? How much Escherichiae do you have? But if you look that within that genus, let's just take Streptococcus, for example, you have Strep pyogenes, causes strep throat, group A strep, so we don't like that guy. And then you have something called Strep salivarius. And Strep salivarius is a beneficial bacteria that has been found to reduce NF-kappa beta transcription in the intestines and reduce inflammation. They're both Streptococcus in that genus. Two totally different actions on the body. So to say, like, this is how much we want of them is really short-sighted, and we can't say that because we don't know who is actually
Oh, no way. So we basically don't know if it's the guy that's giving us strep throat or the one that's making our gut super healthy. So maybe it's good that they're high levels. It's the good ones.
Exactly. It's like saying, like, hey, something's wrong with this community. There's, like, a lot of crime happening, or, you know, people are getting sick. And you're just saying there's 100 people. Well, how many doctors, how many nurses, how many lawyers, how many policemen? That would give us the actual information about what's happening so that we can fix it. So that's just talking about the genus level. And that's where most of those stool tests are just saying the genus and how much are there. And it's not telling us about who's in there. You go one further and then you get to the species level. So this, in terms of E. coli, would be Escherichia coli. E. coli as a species has a bunch of different strains. And so strain is like the final level of bacteria in terms of specificity. And you can have E. coli 0157H7. That gives you foodborne illness, diarrhea. You also have E. coli Nissl 1917. We use that as a probiotic for ulcerative colitis and constipation. And so even if we went to E. coli, which is the species level, you still have two different guys doing two totally different things, and one can be really helpful and one can be really harmful. And so when we talk about stool testing, they're looking at the genus level most of the time.
Oh, no way. So
Almost none of them are looking
so
at
they're
the
looking
strain
at
level.
you're looking at Los Angeles, where in fact we just want to ask for individual person.
And what they're doing. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, Aggie, she does podcasts and,
Yeah.
you know, this and that. And that's how specific we need to get if we're going to start to make actionable, like clinical recommendations on things.
Yeah.
But get back to my original point. Even if we
Everyone's still there. Look, they're there.
you guys win if you're still listening. That was like biology, like beginning phases. But yeah, if, you know, even if we go back to what I was originally saying, even if we knew all the strains, we still don't know what to tell people because we don't know the ideal microbiome.
Because then you don't really know if the good E. coli, like this is the exact level that you need. Or do we know that?
Or is it actually expressing the gene that makes Shiga toxin? Or, you know, like there's so many things that we're just not there yet. And
Yeah.
I think people are getting excited, and it's definitely an exciting field. If you're a nerd like me, I love this research, but we're years out from being at a place where we can make clinical recommendations based on stool tests. So save your money 100%, get a gym membership with it. Because that has research.
Or a walking treadmill, because we both have
walking
like the desk treadmill that we both got, and we're both in love. So you're not like the biggest fan, and like I've seen you eat. To me, it seems like you eat everything. I come to your house and you have bread and you have dairy and you have things that are like, you know, you have lectins in your house, I've seen. And so like what is going on with things that are being promoted by these crazy influencers that tell you like, oh, you know, gluten is the kind of gluten that we have currently is not exactly, like it can bloat you and can be inflammatory. And like I posted a video about raw milk yesterday, and I never get as many death threats when it comes to oat milk and raw milk. People like, you know, E. coli, you can die from E. coli and the bacteria. And I said like,
not
it's
E.
so
coli
fun-
Nissel, but yes, the other one. You can.
And the funny thing is, I just realized it's like, obviously it requires a little bit of context. Like, I don't think industrial dairy should be unpasteurized. I do think it's like, you know, you go to Nobu and it's like $1 billion franchise where they sell raw fish, which is #1 cause of parasite. And we just have this understanding that they probably have some sort of level of hygiene. And yet the chances of getting a parasite are quite high from raw fish. I don't care how well, like there's no way to check it. You can't just say like, oh, we checked that salmon and you're totally good. There's no way of checking it. It's like a roulette. And just as someone who just finished a parasite cleanse and I pooped out 2 big guys like this, it makes me realize that it's just so funny that we have created these like, oh, you know, raw milk, like it's the bad guy, even though, you know, there's some sort of hygiene standards that are being processed. And obviously I wouldn't drink it from normal, you know, like unless I trust the source, versus like, for example, it's okay for us to have raw fish or even raw meat in Europe, which is a big source of all of these guys. So yeah, let's talk about excluding things and just creating all of these.
Diet.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important background. Again, I had an eating disorder. So like restriction was something that I was very, very talented at. Like I can completely restrict things. I can lose weight. But it was very unhealthy.
The kind of like, what is it?
Orthorexia. I had full-on anorexia and bulimia when I was in my teens. Yeah. And never to the point where it was dangerous to my health or had to be inpatient or anything like that, and definitely moved through it. But with eating...
How old are you?
Started in high school, throughout college. Yeah,
so
into my
no
20s.
wonder you're so like passionate about it, because you're like...
But it's more common than you think. So 3% have diagnosable anorexia nervosa. But I'm not part of that 3%. I was never diagnosed, never sought treatment. And I don't recommend this for anybody, but was able to like work through it. And it's very, very, very common how many girls you'll talk to who have at least thrown up at some point because they thought they ate too much or restricted. And so it's a spectrum, and a lot of people are falling on the spectrum and may never seek professional help, but they're still there and they're still struggling with mental health. And when you are restricting to such an extent, your mind starts to obsess about food. And, you know, I was going from, okay, breakfast, then the next thing I would think about is, what can I eat next? Will it be a snack, or do I have to wait till lunch? And throughout that 4-hour period, I was thinking about food most of the time. And one question I ask my patients now, where I'm kind of screening for this, is what % of the time do you think about food? It is astounding how much I hear It's 90% of my day. It's 70% of my day. It's 99% of my day. I've never not thought about food. So it's this obsession that can happen when we are ultra restricting our diet, because it's like, don't think of a pink elephant. All you're going to think of is a pink elephant. You add in caloric restriction or even starvation
On top of that,
to that,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the brain becomes even more obsessive.
I mean, because your brain chemistry is completely unbalanced when you don't eat. That's the one thing about, like, I think I'm very much against counting calories, because for me, it's just like you stop looking at food as nutrients, you start looking at them as like calories, right?
Yeah,
and it's like,
or the
and
enemy.
yeah, because it's
Exactly.
like, oh, this is all the things that I love, like they're high in calories, but that's also okay, because it's like so funny when I go to a restaurant and like, I don't remember what it was, but I once asked, like, a waiter, was when I was vegan, and I was like asking like, what's inside, and he's like, so we have a steak for meat eaters, and for you we have green salad with tomato and lettuce. And I'm like, that's like 100 calories. No, it could be even less. Don't worry. And I'm like, no, as in like, that's not enough energy. Because for me, calories mean energy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, 100 calories is like, you're just like giving me a little in my tank. I need
Yeah.
fuel.
Yeah.
Like, give me more. And he thought he's so used to calories that he was like, oh no, it's probably less than 100 calories. And I'm like, exactly my point. And the
Yeah.
steak is 700. There's just not enough calories for me to like keep going. But I'm so glad you say that, because it's like, even with biohacking, the way I teach is, it's like, I eat things that are not Dave Asprey's approved, because I'm like, I live a real life, and I still like, it's not an everyday part of my diet, but like every day I eat something, at least one thing that's not approved. Yesterday was a cheese toasty with like full on wheat and full on dairy cheese, not the healthy one, the unhealthy, you know what I mean? Like, not even the healthy version. And then I was fine. And then like, I know that I do it almost on purpose to train myself that I can have this and the next morning still be fine. And I think the more I would restrict, I know myself, I would be the same. I would be like thinking about that toasty until today.
Yeah, and like, what if we like challenged that and took it one step further too, and said, I can eat this unhealthy thing. What if we challenge what health actually is from food? And this is, getting into more of the spiritual, not even, just when you look at, let's go back to sugar. When you look at a Snickers bar, the average person would say that's unhealthy, or a milkshake, that's unhealthy.
I would be that person.
Right. Well, and it's understandable too, in terms of, for a lot of people, it may not be the best decision. But let's take a cancer patient who is in the last 4 months of their life, potentially. They're dealing with cachexia, muscle wasting, and severe reductions in body weight from treatment, from lack of hunger, right? So for that person, a Snickers bar or a milkshake is very, very healthy. It's actually one of the best things that they could eat, because it's so calorically dense. It's going to help them fuel to help them live a higher quality of life for the last months that they have.
Or even, if you are a very active person, you don't need to be a dying patient. Like,
Totally.
it really depends on your activity level. When I was like getting ready to climb Kilimanjaro, I had these like just these sugar things that was just basically jelly with sugar. It was nothing. Not even like fat. It was just pure sugar. Because you need the energy, and it's like, and I needed that energy to be able to climb the mountain. So it's like, it's I guess everything is in context, right? Like, if you have a sedentary lifestyle and you're under 10,000 steps, because it's like, you see how Europeans walk so much more. And they eat almost everything, and they don't seem to be struggling with the rates of obesity we do. It's the proportion of your activity level. And I guess at the end of the day, it's like, it's sad, because it's, to me, like you said, spiritually comes to your sense of worth. And somehow in America, it's like, you have to tell us that we're worth it, as women, because that's subconsciously, it says like, you think you're not. We know you think you're not, but we're going to tell you you're worth it. But if it was such a given, like, you're a woman, you would never have to run a commercial like, we think you're a woman. And you're like, yeah, I'm a woman, like, I'm not blind. But like, because when L'Oreal says, we think you're worth it, it's like, they're basically saying, we know you think you're not, but we're just reminding you. So it's a little bit like that. This whole industry is built on the fact that it's perpetuating this idea that you're not doing enough, and you're not educated enough. And it's just like really easy to buy into that, because it's a core wound for every human, right? Like, the not enoughness.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good good point. And there's a ton of psychology around food. And that's a whole nother.
But I love that you
subject.
actually mentioned that, because I think it's really easy to say like, yeah, in the ideal world, I would love to live on like a full-on ancestral diet and whatnot. And, you know, I made my own yogurt today at 2 a.m. because I was jet lagged, and I was just like, okay, might as well do it. But the reality of like, I want to live a life, like a rich life in a community. I want to go to Paris and have a croissant and not just feel like, oh, white flour. Oh my God. Like, it's like,
Yeah. And these things, a lot of these things are very likely not harming us, you know? And I work with a ton of high achievers and athletes, and if they ate a whole foods diet only, just like chicken, sweet potatoes, broccoli, fruit, they would be eating all day long to get the amount of fuel they needed to put on the muscle, or to keep their muscle, or to keep up with their training programs. So they're oftentimes having to go to protein shakes and processed foods, and it's not bad for them. It's actually essential because they want to be that high performing. We have technology now that allows us to reach different levels. And if that's your goal, you know, we should start to question when we say this is healthy, this is not healthy, this is natural, this is unnatural. There's so much there to discuss, and it's not as simple as it sounds, because it's like you said, it's individualized. Like, it's going to be very different.
And also like the just definition of what healthy is in the Western world is so limiting, because like in the, you know, if you ask someone from the Eastern culture, they would say like, oh, being healthy is being at peace, right? So not having the mental chatter. So like, yeah, my lab work is great, but I'm constantly obsessing about my sort of like, what is it, turkey breast with rice and broccoli, and you have 4% body fat, and I'm like, look, I'm like, really? But like, you also are and you're constantly obsessing about food, and we can never go out to dinner because you're counting calories. So I don't think that healthy is. And I think what you're actually offering is like understanding that health has a much broader lens, that it's like a healthy mind, healthy soul, healthy body, because a healthy body without the healthy mind, you know, technically, you know, you can have like early stages of anorexia and have a good body mass percentage. Is that healthy?
Right.
Or because you have no cholesterol, whatever it is. So that's really special. I want to learn how you healed yourself, and then we want to talk about different testings that other people can, you know, we can do that you believe that are actually worth the money.
Yeah, so I
It's left us hanging there.
Chronic GI issues since I was really, really little.
And then you had chronic GI issues, spent $250,000 to heal yourself, and then nothing. And then
yeah, I went through everything. I mean, I saw everybody. And for me, you know, it was a combination of things, and I was always looking for the one thing. I was looking for, is it a parasite? And I took those tests, and I was diagnosed with parasites, and I was like, I finally found it. And then we would treat it, and I'd get better, and I'd be like, yes, we figured it out. Yeah. I'm healed forever. And then a few weeks later, I would be right back where I started. And this would happen over and over. And I'd tell my mom, okay, I think it's this. I think it's that. I got rid of gluten. I got rid of dairy. I went
got rid of fun.
Yeah. I literally tried everything. And I was getting really frustrated, like super frustrated. When you're constipated, it affects your mood. Like,
oh yeah, because the toxins like kind of like leak back into your body, and you just don't
feel good. Like fatigue. I was cranky. And yeah, to have like a good bowel movement, like you can change your whole day.
Oh, 100. If I don't go to the bathroom in the morning, it's just like the day is never the same.
Yeah. And then I had a friend look at me one day. This was like one of those pivotal moments. And he's like, you're always talking about how sick you are. And I don't think you're sick at all. And it was like, first of all, I was like defensive. I was like, what? I didn't think of myself as like a wet blanket like that, or just like somebody who really had an identity in sickness. And then I really looked at it and I was like, whoa, I talk about this all the time, about how I don't feel well, about everything's wrong with me. I convinced myself I had an autoimmune condition at one point. Like I really had this mindset around being sick, and it just had become my reality. And in reality, I wasn't sick at all. I was just constipated. Like one out of every
Which is pretty bad, by the way. So don't take it very serious. Yeah, it's not great.
It's not fun. It's definitely not fun. But I made it so much worse in my head, like really catastrophized. And so for me, it was some of the physical things, like I needed to eat more food. If you don't eat food, a lot's not going to come out. So I was under eating constantly.
Which is, I think, just sorry to interrupt, but the number one reason why I think social media is super unhealthy, because every time I watch a woman, what I eat in a day, I'm like, wait, you're done? This was your dinner? I mean, I would have that until lunch. And I'm like a health coach, like certified, whatever, nutrition coach, and I get self-conscious. I'm like,
Yeah.
really? Because it's like you watch one video, second video, another girl that like is happy on 1,000 calories, and like I can't think straight when I eat so little.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So like it's like definitely not healthy for me to watch these videos. Even right now, I'm like, wow.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. So under eating, and then I needed to take a couple of supplements like magnesium, but a huge piece of my puzzle was the mental health piece. Like I needed to get out of the sick mentality. I needed to realize I was okay. I was more than okay. Like I was able to thrive, and I really needed to start to manage my stress better. And I'm still working on that one for sure.
Oh yeah.
But the mental health piece we can't minimize, especially in chronic GI, because we just changed the name of a whole class of GI disorders from functional GI disorders to disorders of the gut-brain interaction. They're now classified
No
under.
way.
Yeah.
Oh my
And that's
goodness.
because that we know now how intimately the gut and the brain are connected, and that there is something really powerful going on here and we need to address it. And I didn't even know, but I took myself basically through a process of rewiring my brain around health and saying like, actually, this is normal. It's actually very normal to be constipated when you travel. You can still treat it and do things, but it doesn't mean that you're sick or something's really wrong with you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was normalization. A lot of it was acceptance and commitment of like, you're going to be constipated sometimes. And like in the grand scheme of the world, I'll take it, right?
Yeah.
Like, thank
So-
you.
Yeah. And so I love that you talk about normal processes that are happening in our bodies. Because a lot of times when you do these restrictive diets, like then when you have a pickle, it's going to bloat you, right? Or, like that's just normal because your diet's super restrictive. So your gut isn't exposed to so many things. So the more you actually eat, the more you can handle, ironically. That's one. And then second, so funny that you say that. And I might be wrong because again, I'm not a doctor, but I was talking to a friend about 2 weeks ago. And she said like, oh my God, I never had digestive issues, but I got SIBO. And I'm like, I got SIBO. I got treated by your clinic. And after going through everything and nothing was working and doing a 21-day fast, I realized, I was like, oh my God, is it coming back now? Like, you're paranoid. I'm like, oh my God, SIBO is not a digestive issue. It's a mental health stress-related disorder where you basically, when you're too stressed, you're not producing digestive enzymes and the stomach acid, then you let the bacteria like not being stopped at the stomach level and they go to your intestine, right? So like it's in a way, a lot of times when they say like, oh, for the rest of your life, you need to supplement HLC and digestive enzymes, or you can just eat and rest and digest, and your body can produce those quite naturally, which will naturally protect your intestine from all of this bacteria, right? But it's like...
There's way more benefit than we think from addressing things from this gut-brain interaction piece. And it's most gastroenterologists don't have the time to even address it and just don't have the education. And no offense. I mean, I didn't have this education 10 years ago. And so most don't even know enough about it to be able to start to convey it with their patients other than work on stress. Meditate, and it's like, well, what do I do with that? And
like which is like when you're being told like don't stress is like makes you more annoyed.
You're
like
oh, okay,
thanks. Yeah, it's super helpful.
Don't be anxious.
But it's funny because like in Chinese medicine they say like if you're stressed, don't eat. Like I go to my Chinese medicine doctor and she's like, when you feel stressed, you're not supposed to eat or have like, if it's like a stressful day and you feel like you want to eat, just have a soup or like take way more time to chew and that like. She doesn't really like, she doesn't say meditate. Oh, sorry. So what kind of, after we've learned what we can just waste our money on, what can we actually, what's worth the investment?
There's so many things that are worth the investment. And this is what I tell people. It's like, I'm not trying to be like negative Nancy, like all things suck, like your doomsday, right? It's quite the opposite. I'm like,
we're all gonna die.
Yeah. There's so many things that we can do to help improve our lifespan. And that's really, now that I like have dove into the GI stuff, I have 2 docs who work on GI as well. And I give a lot of those GI cases to them because my interest now is more back what it used to be. So I used to work in research and undergraduate and after college as well, looking at performance enhancement for warfighters for a little bit and these other things where I love athletics and just like human performance. And it really can go into this longevity picture too. It's how long can we live, but more importantly, how well can we live while we're here? Because I think that's the bigger piece. We don't want to live till 100 if the last 10 years are in bed. And there's a lot
the
of
health span, right? Not
health
only
span. Yeah. Shortening that that health span lifespan gap that can happen in the last, it's on average it's about 9 years of life. You go to your primary care and they'll order CBC, CMP, which are going to be like your basic blood work panel with lipid panels. Maybe they do a CRP or A1C. So they're getting kind of a general picture about like, do you have diabetes right now? Do you have a severe infection? Do you have a blood cancer kind of thing? They're not going to get, are you healthy from that? They're going to get, are you not sick? Maybe like a piece of that, but like,
But I also had a friend who had cancer and her lab work came back great. So
right, that's a whole nother story, right? But it's actually a part of my longevity workup too, and we don't know everything. Like that's definitely not the case. But we know enough to be doing more than we're doing in primary care. And so that's my goal with people is saying, okay, once we finish fixing your GI issues, or if you don't have any to start with, how can we make sure you have the healthiest life possible so you can pick up your grandkids, you can go for walks when you're in your 80s and 90s and just really enjoy your time here. And so when we look at testing, doing advanced cardiovascular risk factors are so important in my mind because it's still the number one cause of death for men and women.
wow.
So we want to see like what's the most likely thing that you're going to die from based on your family history and just your current lab work. And we have to look at heart disease for every individual. And at this stage in the game, we can really prevent most of heart disease with the things that we have in our toolbox in medicine. So that's one that I think that we should be going a lot harder and more aggressive on because we can say, hey, let's get rid of that one for you. Heart disease can be silent. We call it the silent killer sometimes because you don't know until you have a heart attack, and we don't want somebody to get to that place. So we look at apolipoprotein B, Lp(a), homocysteine, CRP levels, and then we look at metabolic factors that influence heart disease as well. So oral glucose tolerance tests and insulin responses to glucose. And what this is just how is your body responding to eating sugar? Do you have to put out a little amount of insulin or a ton of insulin because your cells are insulin resistant?
But it's also there's the VO.
VO2 max.
VO2 max, which is something I did in a longevity clinic, right? So like they check your arteries, that like you blow into the special machine and they're like, oh, you actually, it could have been better, right? Like
Yeah. So I do VO2 max tests on all my concierge patients, and that's taking cardiovascular health to the next level because that's like really saying what can your heart do under stress and how far can you push your cardiorespiratory fitness level. And the evidence behind having a high level of cardiovascular and respiratory fitness is astounding. So if you go from being a low level of heart and lung fitness when it comes to exercise to below average, so still pretty low, 50% reduction in mortality.
Wow.
Huge. If you go from
So how do we improve that? Just because, are we supposed to do cardio? Are we not supposed to do cardio?
We're supposed to do cardio. Final answer. And I didn't think so too. Like when things I've like royally messed up on in my teens and 20s, I was like, only resistance training, cardio makes you fat or whatever. And cardiovascular exercise has so much research to reduce the risk for heart disease. But just like I said, we're looking at all-cause mortality with that statistic.
Yeah.
And so you see, rates of everything, kidney failure go down. Like all of these things will reduce with cardiovascular exercise.
And I think there are different ways. Obviously, you don't have to go on a 40-mile run. Like I personally like the sit training where you just like sprint and turbo training, which I from what I understand, trains your heart even better than just like a continuous run for.
I think there's benefits to both. I think, what I advocate for if people have the time is steady state, low intensity cardiovascular exercise being majority of your cardiovascular exercise, and then you having shorter intervals of high intensity training, because that high intensity piece is where you're going to push that VO2 max up higher. So that's going to be a big piece of getting that number higher, and that really has a lot of evidence for being a big biomarker for longevity.
How does functional medicine contribute to like increased longevity? How would you say it's like the missing piece?
I think that in just the integrative functional medicine space in general, we're more apt to be looking at things from a holistic standpoint. So looking at all parts of your body, your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, your relationships, and your community. And I think that's really important in health. And we take the time with people. So I sit down with my patients for at least an hour the first time we meet, almost 2 hours, and go through all of the things. And in conventional medicine, it's not the fault of the doctors. They just don't have the time. Like insurance isn't reimbursing for it. And so to have quality time with a doctor who actually gets to know you and know your family history, and then being more open to doing advanced testing that may not be covered by insurance.
Like you mentioned something about bone testing or DEXA testing, right?
Body composition testing, bone density testing, heart scans, VO2 max testing. Like we do a lot of tests, early cancer detection testing that's now available. We do a lot of tests that is not covered by insurance and isn't the standard of care. Because if we can catch something early or actually prevent it, I think that's way better than reactionary medicine waiting till it's actually developed to treat it. And I think there's a balance. We don't want to over test to an extent, but I think we need to be testing more than the average primary care.
What are you the most excited about in the longevity space that's coming up?
Oh, good question. A couple of things. AI is going to be really interesting in medicine in general. But my interests are really in the melding of exercise science and performance with longevity. And so how can we use what we know in the exercise science world and benefit people who are not athletes? You know, they're not triathletes, but they want to live a really long time. Because I think there's a lot of knowledge there that we can be applying to help people extend their health span to make sure that they're really healthy those last few years of life.
What's your stance on peptides? Do you think they're the future, yay or nay?
I think peptides are really interesting. I mean, there's some peptides that are FDA approved, right? You look at semaglutide or some of the other ones. So I think in that regard, we've already tested them and they work really well, and I use them in my practice. With the non-FDA approved peptides, these are going to be things, you know, like BPC 157 or some of the other ones. I don't use them yet because I think it's the wild west of medicine or health or biohacking. I think that for me, I'm more conservative because I wasn't conservative before and I did all of the things and I made so many mistakes that at this point in my career, I'm much more conservative with things that haven't been put through clinical trials yet, because I think a lot of them show a lot of promise. And I think it's very likely that there's going to be some of them at least that go through clinical trials, have great outcomes, and we start using them in practice. But I want to wait till we get that clear of like, okay, yeah, this one's not causing cancer. We didn't see any adverse health outcomes. Like, pretty low risk and high benefit from it.
Do you ever, like when it comes to peptides, are there any studies in other countries? Because I know that Japan is like on the cutting edge in terms of like, would that be a consideration or?
For sure, yeah. But the last time I checked, a lot of the ones that we commonly see, most of the studies are still at the rodent stage. So they're still looking at mice and mostly mice models. And that's not enough for me. We're not mice. There's been a ton in the longevity space that showed interesting things in mice and failed in humans.
Wow.
And so for me, it's like I still want to see the human data at large scale, and I really want to see that it's not harming people before I start to use it. Also because I think you have to weigh things, right? Like if you have a stage 4 cancer and it's your last hope of something and trying something that hasn't been well researched yet, that's a lot different than a healthy individual who has everything going for them, is super healthy. Should we be taking such big risks in that population?
I know, I'm very guilty of that because I love
I get it though, I've been there too.
Yeah. I have gotten my peptide from 3 different people, and I think the ones that are very nonchalant about it and just sell it as some sort of candy. Like in hindsight, I'm like, oh, why would you not tell me about these are common side effects? And they're like, oh yeah, they are, but like it's a great thing. I'm like, let me make an informed decision of like, wasn't melanotin that you get like sunspots or whatever?
Melanotin?
Yeah. I'm like, why'd you not tell me? I'm like, oh, this is such a great. I'm like, no, it's not a peptide for me at all. Like, why would you just not say that I'm going to have sunspots? I never did in my entire life. So like, I'm like, it's actually something I'm injecting in my body. So
informed consent.
Yeah, it was not informed
consent. And the
consent.
injectables, I mean, that's a whole nother story too. The injectables, you got to be really cautious because where are these things being formulated and I forget what now, but like
Oh,
compounded.
yeah, like compounded. Yeah, that's the word.
Where is this actually happening? Is it a sterile facility, and is it being highly regulated? Because there's been incidents of compounding pharmacies coming out with injectables that have led to meningitis outbreaks and deaths in many individuals.
Yeah.
And
You gotta be careful.
you just got to be careful and really say like risk benefit ratio, is this worth it or not? I've done a ton of stuff in my life. Looking back, I'd be like, that was really stupid. So I'm not saying perfect. I'm here because I messed up for sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going to be totally fine. They're going to find health benefits, and we'll probably see that some of them have good research at some point. But we're just not there yet. Yeah.
Amazing. Mary, where can people find you?
People can find me on my website, modernmed.com, modrnmed.com. I share a ton of free info on social media. Dr. Mary Pardee, it's dr.Mary Pardee. And yeah, I still see patients in person who live in Los Angeles too. So hit my office up if you want to dive deep into concierge medicine.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation.
You're the best. I really appreciate you.